The streets of Paris were quiet that night. The kind of quiet that makes every distant sound feel sharper closer. Daniel and Elise had returned from a long evening wandering the avenues, their laughter soft as they stumbled into the narrow hallway of the modest hotel they'd chosen. The building was old, its walls faded with age, and though it had charm by day, at night, it seemed to breathe differently. The elevator creaked as it pulled them upward, and when the doors opened, they stepped into a corridor lined with dim bulbs that hummed faintly against the silence. Their room was small, with a single window overlooking the alley below. Elise tossed her bag onto the chair while Daniel turned the lock twice, testing it. The latch felt fragile, as if it could snap with too much pressure. They said nothing about it, both too tired, but Daniel quietly slid the desk chair in front of the door, the legs scraping against the wood. Hours later, the city outside had fallen asleep, but Elise stirred awake to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, they echoed along the corridor. She held her breath, listening. The steps stopped a bar. Then a soft knock tapped against their door. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Daniel was awake now too. He pressed a finger to his lips, urging her to keep silent. They both stared at the door, the weak light from the hallway spilling through the gap at the threshold. A shadow shifted, breaking the line of light. Someone was standing there, motionless. After what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. But the shadow didn't move. It lingered tall and distorted, as though the figure had pressed itself close against the door. Elise clutched Daniel's hand, her pulse racing. The old chair wedged against the knob trembled slightly, as if a pressure leaned from the other side. Daniel forced himself to look through the peephole. For a second, he saw nothing but blurred light. Then a pale face flickered into view, so close to the lens that the features bent out of shape. Eyes unblinking, skin almost gray under the hallway lamp. He stepped back immediately, his breath sharp and shallow. "Up." "Don't open it," Elise whispered, her voice almost inaudible. The knocking didn't return, but the weight against the door remained. They could hear a faint scrape like fingers dragging slowly across the wood. Then silence. Minutes passed. Finally, the shadow lifted from the light at the bottom of the door. The hallway outside grew still again. They waited, neither of them daring to move. Elise's eyes searched the ceiling, as if the sound might start again at any moment. Daniel stayed seated on the edge of the bed, his body rigid, ears straining for the slightest noise. When exhaustion finally pressed down heavier than fear, Elise lay back down, pulling the blanket to her chin. Daniel kept his gaze on the door, the chair still braced against it. And though the knocking had ceased, he couldn't rid himself of the feeling that someone was still standing there, listening to every beat of his heart. Dawn crept in slowly, gray light bleeding into the room through the thin curtains. Elise stirred awake, though her sleep had been shallow, broken by fragments of unease. Daniel hadn't closed his eyes once. He was still seated at the edge of the bed, stiff from the night, his gaze fixed on the door, as if he feared it might open on its own. When he finally stood, he moved quietly, pulling the chair back from the door with care. The wood legs scraped lightly against the floor, a sound too loud for the stillness. He unlocked the latch, pausing before turning the knob. Elise sat up, her voice low. "Don't," she said, but curiosity had grown stronger than caution. The hallway beyond was empty, yet the air carried a faint chill, as though someone had only just walked past. Daniel stepped out cautiously, glancing down the corridor. The light bulbs flickered above him, buzzing faintly, and he thought he heard the echo of steps somewhere distant. But no one appeared. No shadow lingered. Only silence. When they descended to the lobby, the desk clerk looked at them with an odd expression as if he knew something, but chose not to speak. Elise asked if anyone else had been on their floor last night, if perhaps a guest had mistaken their door for another. The clerk shook his head slowly. "That floor is nearly empty," he replied in his heavy accent. "Only you." His eyes drifted to the old brass keys hanging behind him, his fingers tapping against the counter, restless. They returned upstairs, uneasy gathering their belongings more quickly than planned. Elise pressed her ear to the door before opening it, convinced she might hear breathing on the other side. But again, the corridor stood vacant, long and narrow, lined with faded wallpaper that seemed to peel a little more with each glance. As Daniel lifted his suitcase, something caught his eye near the floor. A mark along the wood, faint but unmistakable, long scratches carved around the keyhole, as if someone had forced metal against it trying to pry it open. The jagged grooves stretched downward, ending near the handle. He crouched closer, his chest tightening. The edges were fresh, not yet dulled by time. He looked back at Elise, her face pale, as she noticed the same thing. Neither spoke. Instead, they moved quickly, suitcases rattling behind them as they walked the length of the corridor. Yet with every step, Daniel felt the same pressure he had felt through the night, as though invisible eyes followed them. When they reached the elevator, Elise pressed the button frantically, her hands trembling. The old machine groaned as it descended. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw a figure at the far end of the hall, too tall, standing too still. But when the elevator doors opened, he pulled Elise inside without looking back. They left the hotel before the city fully woke, the streets still damp from the morning rain. As they walked quickly toward the train station, Elise whispered, "Do you think it was real or someone just trying to scare us?" Daniel didn't answer. His mind replayed the pale face pressed against the peephole, the way the eyes had seemed to watch not just through the glass, but deeper into him. Some things weren't meant to be explained. And even as the noise of the waking city grew louder, he could not shake the sensation that whoever stood outside their door had not been left behind in the hotel. Something lingered, waiting and listening. Story 2: The Deadly Taxi Ride, Mexico City. The air in Mexico City was thick with heat and exhaust fumes, the night settling over the sprawling streets in a restless haze. Claire tugged her suitcase through the crowded terminal, her body heavy with fatigue after hours of travel. She wanted nothing more than to reach her hotel to sleep. The bright lights of the airport glared against her tired eyes, and when she stepped through the automatic doors, the noise of honking taxis and shouting drivers enveloped her. A man approached quickly, his shirt wrinkled, his taxi sign worn from years of use. He lifted her bag without asking, leading her toward a yellow cab parked beneath the dim glow of the street lamp. For a moment, Claire hesitated. Something about his eyes unsettled her, dark, watchful, as if measuring her. But exhaustion dulled her caution. She slid into the back seat, the door closing with a hollow thud. The city rushed past them in streaks of neon and shadow. Vendors wheeled carts along sidewalks, and stray dogs darted between alleys. Claire watched the blur through the glass, clutching her phone loosely in her hand. The driver spoke little, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. At first, the route felt normal, familiar, from the map she had studied earlier. But gradually the streets thinned. Billboards disappeared, replaced by vacant lots and shuttered shops. Claire leaned forward. "This doesn't look right," she murmured, more to herself than to him. The driver didn't answer. The car slowed at a red light, the glow washing his face in crimson. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, jaw set. Her pulse quickened. She opened the map on her phone, the blue dot drifting farther from the bright center of the city, sinking into a web of empty roads. She texted her friend back home a quick message. "Something's wrong. Here's my location." Her thumb trembled as she hit send. The taxi turned sharply down a narrow street, lined with abandoned warehouses. The buildings loomed, their windows shattered like empty eyes. The hum of the city was gone, replaced by silence. Claire's hand slid to the door handle, testing it. Locked. The driver's voice finally broke the quiet, low and measured. "Almost there." The words felt heavy, final. Claire's breath caught. Every instinct screamed that she had to get out. The headlights carved a thin path through the darkness as the car moved deeper into the deserted stretch. She glanced at the rearview mirror. His eyes were on her now, no longer on the road. They didn't blink. Her phone vibrated in her palm, her friend's reply. "Call the police. Sending them your location now." Relief flickered through her fear, but she kept the screen angled away, hiding the glow. The driver hadn't noticed yet. Outside, the street narrowed further, hemmed in by walls of corrugated steel. It felt like a trap, a place meant to keep sound from escaping. Claire pressed her body against the door, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Somewhere ahead, the shadows seemed to shift, as if someone was waiting for them in the dark. The taxi rolled deeper into the narrow lane, the engine's hum echoing off the rusted steel walls. Claire's throat tightened as the car slowed, headlights illuminating piles of debris and graffiti-stained gates. The driver's hands flexed around the wheel, knuckles pale, as though the act of slowing was deliberate, measured. She imagined unseen figures waiting in the shadows, stepping forward once the car stopped. Her phone vibrated again. A message: "Stay calm. Police on the way." Claire's grip on the device tightened. She slid it silently into her jacket pocket, forcing her face into stillness, as if any sudden movement might provoke him. The driver's gaze flicked to the mirror once more. His lips curved into something almost like a smile, though it carried no warmth. The car came to a stop. The air outside was unnervingly still, heavy with the scent of oil and dust. Claire's skin prickled with the knowledge that she had been brought somewhere she should never have been. He turned in his seat slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "End of the line," he murmured, voice low and final. His hand moved toward the locks. Before he could press them, a beam of blue light swept across the alley, bright, piercing. A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. The driver stiffened his head, snapping toward the rear window. For the first time, Claire saw something flicker across his face, fear or anger. His hand jerked from the locks to the gear shift, fumbling. Claire acted before she could lose her nerve. She shoved hard against the opposite door, bracing her shoulder until it gave way. The lock clicked up under her weight, the old mechanism faltering, and the door swung outward into the cold night air. She stumbled onto the gravel, knees scraping, lungs burning with adrenaline. The taxi roared into motion, wheels spitting dust as it reversed wildly, then careened down the alley. The siren closed in flashing lights painting the walls in red and blue. Claire ran toward them, her voice breaking as she shouted for help. 2 police cars cut the taxi off at the mouth of the street, engines snarling. Officers spilled out voices sharp and commanding. The driver tried to back away again, but metal shrieked as a cruiser slammed against his bumper, pinning the vehicle in place. Claire collapsed against the wall, her whole body trembling. The world around her blurred the shouts, the slamming of doors the driver dragged out of the cab, his protest swallowed by handcuffs and steel. She barely noticed when an officer crouched before her speaking gently in Spanish she struggled to understand. His tone was steady grounding, pulling her back from the fog of panic. He motioned for her phone, and when she handed it over, she saw her friend's desperate messages still lighting the screen. The night stretched on as statements were taken, questions asked, details written down. Claire's voice wavered but held. When at last she was escorted to safety, the weight of what had nearly happened settled cold in her chest. As the city lights reappeared, glowing faintly through the haze, she realized how close the darkness had come to swallowing her whole. Yet, even as she reached the sanctuary of her hotel, a thought lingered. How many others had climbed into cabs like that? Faces never seen again, names reduced to whispers, carried through Mexico City's restless streets. Story 3: The Abandoned Lodge, Japan. The forest around Nagano was quiet as the group of hikers pushed deeper into the mountain trail. The air had grown colder as evening approached, and a mist clung low to the ground, softening the outline of trees into pale silhouettes. They had misjudged their timing, and the thought of descending in darkness weighed on them all. When the narrow path bent and revealed the outline of a wooden lodge, half hidden among the cedars, relief spread quickly through their tired faces. The structure looked forgotten, its roof sagging beneath years of snow, its windows streaked with grime. Yet the porch stood firm, and the heavy door yielded under the pressure of a shoulder. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of damp wood and mold. Dust spiraled upward, with each step catching in the weak light from their lantern. They settled quickly, grateful for shelter. Mats still lay rolled in the corner, their edges frayed but usable. A long table dominated the main room, its surface scarred with deep cuts as though knives had pressed too hard and too often. One of the hikers, Kenji, laughed uneasily as he brushed debris from it. "It will do," he muttered, his voice echoing faintly against the walls. But as night draped itself over the forest, the stillness of the lodge began to shift. The wind outside moved differently here, sighing through cracks in the wood like a breath held too long. The group sat close, their lantern casting long shadows that trembled along the beams. Elise, the quietest among them, kept glancing toward the hallway that led to the back rooms. The darkness there seemed denser, as though it resisted the glow of their light. When the first sound came, it was faint, a dragging noise like fabric being pulled slowly across the floor. The hikers froze, eyes darting to one another. No one spoke. The sound came again, longer this time, from the hallway. Kenji rose, his lantern held out before him, and stepped carefully toward the noise. The beam of light fell across doors hanging loosely from their frames, a corridor lined with empty rooms. But nothing moved. He returned, his face pale, insisting it must have been the wind. They tried to believe him, though none could explain how wind scraped wood in so steady a rhythm. As they lay down to rest, the dragging sound returned, joined by the faint creak of floorboards, slow and deliberate. Elise turned her face into her blanket, but her eyes remained wide, watching the shadows that pooled at the corners of the room. The lodge seemed awake now, listening as though it had been waiting years for someone to step inside again. The night deepened, the forest outside swallowed by fog that pressed thick against the glass panes. The lantern burned low, its flame fluttering as if threatened by an unseen breath. The hikers lay restless on their mats, each pretending to sleep, though none truly could. The dragging sound moved again, this time from the far side of the lodge, circling the walls as though something traced the perimeter, testing the structure for weakness. Kenji sat up, frustration etched into his face. "It's animals," he whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. He rose once more, lantern in hand, and stepped toward the back of the lodge. The others listened to the groan of the floorboards beneath his weight, then silence as he disappeared into the hall. Minutes passed. The dragging stopped. The air felt thicker, pressing down on them. When Kenji's lantern light failed to return, Elise sat up, her hands trembling. She whispered his name, but the dark swallowed her voice. Finally, a glow flickered in the hall, and he emerged, pale and sweating, his jaw clenched tight. "The rooms are empty," he said too quickly. He would not meet their eyes. They tried to settle again, though unease now pulsed through the group like a second heartbeat. Then came another sound, not dragging, but a sharp click, as if a door closing somewhere deep inside the building. One by one, the hikers sat up, listening, their fear a shared silence. Elise finally spoke, her voice small. "This place, it feels wrong." She gestured toward the walls, toward the ceiling, as if the lodge itself might hear. Her words seemed to loosen something, because almost immediately, the air shifted, cold, rushing in like water through a crack. The lantern guttered violently, then extinguished, plunging them into darkness. In the silence that followed, whispers began. Not loud, not clear, but threaded voices weaving through the black, coming from every direction at once. They were not the voices of any living thing. They rose and fell like a chant, broken syllables. Words caught between breaths. One of the hikers fumbled with his lighter, the flame sparking weakly before catching. In that brief glow, Elise saw shapes at the end of the hall, figures unmoving, their outlines indistinct yet heavy with presence. The lighter slipped from his hand, falling into the dust. The glow vanished, and the lodge swallowed them again. The whispers grew louder, crawling into their ears, filling the space inside their heads. Fear broke them then. They scrambled for their packs, stumbling over one another as they bolted for the door. When it opened at last, the night air rushed in, sharp and wet with fog. They fled into the forest branches, tearing at their clothes, lungs burning with each step. Behind them, the lodge remained. Its windows glimmered faintly in the moonlight, and for just a moment, Elise swore. She saw pale faces pressed to the glass, watching their flight with patient, unblinking eyes. She never looked back again. Story 4: The Highway Shadow. Arizona, USA. The desert stretched endlessly on either side of the highway, a black sea of sand and stone broken only by the faint outlines of cactus and scrub under the silver wash of the moon. David gripped the wheel, his old sedan humming against the asphalt. He had been driving for hours, his eyelids heavy, the road hypnotic in its repetition. Out here, miles from the nearest town, the silence carried a weight of its own, broken only by the occasional hiss of wind sneaking through a crack in the window. At the last gas station, the attendant had warned him of long stretches with no services. "Best keep your tank full," the man had said, his voice flat but his eyes sharp. David had nodded, brushing it off as unnecessary advice. Now, with the needle leaning lower than he'd like, he regretted not listening. The road bent gently, the horizon shifting, and that's when he saw it. A figure standing in the desert just beyond the shoulder, tall, rigid, facing the highway. No movement, no gesture, just a solitary presence in the dark. The headlights brushed over it briefly, catching a glimpse of long limbs and a face too pale beneath the night sky. David's chest tightened. He told himself it was nothing, a hitchhiker, a stranded traveler. But as the car passed, he glanced in the mirror. The figure hadn't turned, hadn't stepped forward. It only stood there staring. He shook his head, forcing his focus back on the road. Yet unease clung to him. Minutes passed, the hum of the engine lulling him again. Then, as the highway opened into a wide stretch of desert, he saw it once more. The same figure standing in the sand on the opposite side this time. Too far, too fast for anyone to have walked there. His hands tightened on the wheel. A prickling sensation crawled along his skin, the undeniable sense of being watched. He tried to convince himself it was exhaustion tricks of the eyes in the moonlight. Still, he reached for the radio, needing sound, any sound to fill the silence. Static hissed from the speakers, no stations coming through. The figure appeared again, miles ahead, illuminated briefly as his headlights swept the bend of the road. It hadn't moved, hadn't changed posture. Always the same distance from the asphalt, always facing him. David's pulse quickened. He pressed harder on the gas, the car rattling as it picked up speed. But the desert remained empty, vast, indifferent. And yet, no matter how far he drove, he knew the figure would be there again, waiting in the next patch of moonlight. The miles blurred beneath his wheels, the asphalt stretching on without end. David's eyes burned from fatigue, but the adrenaline kept him sharp, wired by the repetition of that pale figure appearing and reappearing in the desert's empty sweep. Each time he saw it, the figure was closer to the road, never stepping, never shifting, simply there. A constant presence that defied distance and time. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, the leather slick beneath his palms. The air in the car grew stifling, and though he rolled down the window, the desert wind that rushed in carried no relief, only a hollow, dry heat that pressed against his lungs. He tried not to look into the side mirror, tried not to glance at the darkness beyond the glass. Yet some instinct forced him to. For the briefest moment, he swore he saw it. A reflection of the figure standing directly at the edge of the highway. Shoulder head tilted unnaturally, eyes fixed on his car. When he jerked his gaze back to the road, there was nothing but the white line guiding him forward. His fuel gauge dipped lower. Panic sharpened in his chest as he realized there was no telling how long until the next station. He fumbled for his phone, but the signal icon remained stubbornly empty. The black screen reflected his own face, pale and drawn eyes wide. Yet behind his reflection, faint, distorted, he thought he saw another set of eyes, darker, fixed. The road narrowed as it cut through a stretch of jagged cliffs. The headlights threw long shadows against the rock walls, and every bend seemed to hold the possibility of seeing it again, closer now, impossibly near. His heart hammered in his chest. He pressed the accelerator, the engine whining, as he pushed the old car harder than it was meant to go. Then the radio came alive, not with music, but with a voice faint and broken threading through the static. A whisper at first, then clearer. It spoke no language he recognized, syllables, drawn out deep resonant, carrying the weight of something ancient. He slammed the knob to silence it, but the sound lingered, as though the words had sunk into the air around him, vibrating through the frame of the car. The highway straightened, opening wide to the desert once more. David's headlights cut through the dark, and there it stood directly in the center of the road. This time, tall, immovable, its face pale, and empty eyes fixed on him. He slammed the brakes, tires screaming against the asphalt. The car shuddered violently, skidding to a halt. The figure did not move. For a heartbeat, it stood bathed in the beam of his headlights, its features blurred by shadow, but its presence undeniable. Then the lights flickered, and in the blink of that darkness, the road ahead was empty. Silence returned, absolute and suffocating. David sat, frozen hands shaking on the wheel, the desert stretching infinite around him. The gauge needle rested on empty, and in the stillness, he realized with cold clarity he was not alone on that highway, and he never had been. Story 5. The Suitcase Switch. Bangkok, Thailand. The air inside Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport was thick with the hum of arriving travelers, the shuffle of suitcases rolling across polished floors, and the mechanical voice calling out flights in English and Thai. Michael moved through the crowd with a dazed weariness, his mind fogged from the long flight. All he wanted was to collect his luggage, find a taxi, and sink into the comfort of his hotel bed. The carousel clanked to life, the belt beginning its steady circle. Suitcases spilled out one after another, bright colors, battered edges, the kind of bags that had stories stitched into every tear. Michael's eyes scanned the conveyor until he spotted a familiar black case with a red ribbon tied around the handle. Relief washed through him. He tugged it from the belt, the weight solid and heavier than he remembered, but travel always blurred the details. As he walked toward customs, the case thudded against his side with each step. He thought little of it until a strange unease began to crawl along his spine. It was nothing obvious, just the sense that something was off. The zipper teeth looked newer, shinier as though replaced. The sticker from his last layover was gone. His hand lingered on the handle, and for the first time, he wondered if this was truly his. The line at customs moved slowly, travelers shifting from one foot to the other beneath the watchful eyes of officers. Michael adjusted his grip on the case. It seemed heavier than it should be, unnaturally weighted. Sweat beaded at his temple, though the air conditioning hummed above. Ahead, a man was pulled aside as officers unzipped his bag. Clothing spilled out first, then something wrapped in foil, quickly hidden from view as voices rose in Thai. Michael's chest tightened. He looked at his own suitcase again, the red ribbon fluttering faintly as though mocking him. When his turn came, an officer gestured for him to step forward. The man's eyes were steady, unreadable. Michael's palms dampened as he set the suitcase on the counter. The officer reached for the zipper. Michael swallowed hard, his breath caught in his throat. In that suspended moment, he pictured the bag opening to reveal something foreign, something that did not belong to him. Packages powder weight that carried more than its share of danger. His pulse thundered. Somewhere behind him, a child cried the sound, sharp against the airport's mechanical hum. The officer's hand paused fingers on the zipper. Then, without a word, he stepped away to confer with a colleague. Michael stood frozen, the suitcase between his hands like a beating heart, as the seconds stretched too long, too thin, and the shadow of something unseen seemed to grow inside the bag at his side. The officer returned his expression unreadable and gestured for Michael to wait. Two more guards approached their presence, quiet but firm, their eyes fixed on the suitcase. Michael's stomach twisted. The weight of the bag seemed to anchor him to the floor, every second dragging slower than the last. Around him, the line of passengers shuffled onward, their gazes occasionally flicking toward him. Curiosity tinged with suspicion. One of the guards finally spoke in clipped English. "Please follow." His voice carried no anger, but no room for refusal either. Michael's throat tightened as he nodded, dragging the suitcase behind him. Its wheels echoed against the tiled floor, each rotation a reminder that something inside did not belong. They led him to a smaller inspection room, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The air smelled of disinfectant and dust. A metal table stood in the center. The guard pointed, and Michael lifted the suitcase onto it with trembling arms. He wanted to explain, to say there had been a mistake, but the words died in his mouth. The zipper hissed open, the sound unbearably loud in the sterile room. Layer by layer, the contents were revealed. Clothes were folded neatly, unfamiliar brands, sizes that weren't his. Beneath them, wrapped in layers of plastic, lay tightly packed parcels, edges sharp sealed too perfectly to be anything innocent. Michael's legs weakened, and he gripped the edge of the table. His voice cracked. "This isn't mine." The officers exchanged glances, their faces stern, though not surprised. One of them reached beneath the table, pulling out a second suitcase, identical in every way, down to the scuffed corners and red ribbon. Michael's chest clenched. He saw his own case, then truly his, the sticker from his layover still clinging to the side. The realization struck cold. Someone had switched them. Somewhere between the carousel and the chaos of the crowd, his case had been replaced. He could imagine it now, hands deft and practiced, sliding one bag away and leaving another in its place. The guard's gaze softened slightly as he compared the tags, scanning numbers, checking details. "Not yours," he confirmed quietly. Relief surged through Michael, so intense it made his knees tremble. Yet even as his true suitcase was returned to him, he couldn't shake the weight of the moment. The switched bag remained on the table, parcels sealed within, silent and accusing. He thought of what would have happened had he walked through customs without question, had the officers not stopped him. A single step past the barrier, and his life would have ended in a prison cell or worse. When he finally left the inspection room, dragging the right suitcase this time, the airport's noise felt distant, muffled by the echo of what nearly happened. He moved quickly through the terminal, but the image of the other bag lingered, waiting on that cold table like a trap set for the next unwitting traveler who didn't look closely enough. Story 6: The Woman in Red, Scotland. The stones of Edinburgh Castle glistened under a thin veil of rain, their dark surfaces absorbing the weight of centuries. Tourists drifted along the courtyards in scattered clusters, voices hushed against the vastness of the walls. Among them, Julia lingered at the back of the group, her steps slow, her gaze drawn to the shadowed corners where the lantern light seemed to falter. The air carried a chill that no coat could soften, a cold that seemed to rise from the stone itself. She had come to Scotland seeking history, not hauntings, but something about the castle unsettled her from the moment she crossed its gates. The guide's voice echoed faintly as he recounted battles and betrayals, but Julia's attention wandered. The corridor ahead stretched long and narrow, lined with arched doorways sealed centuries ago. She drifted behind, letting the distance grow until the group's chatter faded into the wet silence. It was there she saw her. At first, it was only a flicker of movement, red fabric shifting against the grey stone. Julia paused, her breath caught. A woman stood at the far end of the hall, tall and still clad in a gown, the color of fresh blood. Her head tilted slightly, though the shadows obscured her face. For an instant, Julia thought it must be part of some performance, an actress for the tourists. But the hall was empty, no sound of footsteps save her own. The woman began to move, gliding rather than walking, her figure almost floating as the gown trailed soundlessly across the stones. Julia's pulse quickened. She turned to call for the group, but her voice stilled in her throat. When she looked back, the woman was gone, as though swallowed by the wall itself. The air shifted colder. A faint scent of damp earth rose, mingled with iron sharp against Julia's nose. She took a step forward, compelled by something she couldn't name. Her shoes echoed too loudly, each sound swallowed quickly by the pressing silence. She traced the wall, where the woman had stood, running her fingertips along the damp stone. Nothing, only rough surface, unyielding and blank. Yet as she lingered, the quiet was pierced by the faintest whisper, so soft it seemed more memory than sound. A single word stretched thin by centuries. Julia leaned closer, straining to hear, and in that moment, the temperature dropped sharply, her breath visible in the air. Her skin prickled, every instinct telling her to leave, yet her body would not move. The corridor seemed longer now, the shadows deeper, as if the castle itself had sealed her inside with whatever had lingered there before her. Julia forced herself to step back, her heartbeat loud in the hollow corridor. She tried to convince herself she had imagined it, a trick of fatigue and suggestion. Yet the air pressed heavy around her, thick with something unseen. She turned to retreat toward the tour group, but the hallway stretched impossibly farther than before. Lantern light dimming with every step. The whisper came again, this time clearer, brushing against her ear as though spoken from just behind her. A woman's voice, low, sorrowful, threaded with anger. Julia spun, but the passage lay empty, its stone walls wet with seeping rain. Still, she felt the presence close, watching, tethered to her. She quickened her pace, her shoes striking sharply against the floor, the sound bouncing between the walls. Then she saw it again, the streak of red at the corner ahead, vanishing just as she approached. The gown, unmistakable, slipping beyond sight. Compelled against reason, Julia followed. The corridor opened into a chamber half forgotten, the ceiling arched and heavy with shadow. The air smelled of soil and mildew. Torches lined the walls, but lay unlit, the only light seeping from a narrow window that barely touched the floor. In that pale wash of moonlight, the woman in red stood again. Her face was clearer now, eyes dark, and hollow skin pale as if drained of life. Her lips moved soundlessly at first, then parted to speak the words foreign, yet understood in some unspoken way, buried, forgotten, betrayed. Each word struck the air like the toll of iron, sharp and echoing. Julia's chest tightened. She wanted to flee, but her legs rooted to the stone. The woman lifted her hand, fingers outstretched as though beckoning. The sleeve of her gown slipped, revealing skin marred with scratches, dirt embedded deep. The truth pressed into Julia's mind unbidden. This was no legend, no harmless ghost story. This was someone entombed alive, centuries past her memory, bound within the walls. The woman stepped closer, her gown leaving no sound on the floor. Julia's breath came in sharp gasps, her vision narrowing. The pale hand nearly brushed her arm when the sound of voices broke through the distant guide, calling tourists, murmuring as they retraced their route. The woman's gaze snapped toward the noise, her eyes burning with something between rage and longing. Then, as quickly as mist in the wind, she was gone. The chamber lay empty once more, save for Julia shaking and breathless. When she stumbled back into the main corridor, the group was just turning the corner, oblivious. The guide smiled politely, as though nothing was amiss, his voice continuing the tale of the castle's history. But Julia lingered one last moment, glancing back into the shadowed hall. There, faint against the stone, remained a smear of red, like the trailing hem of a gown, waiting patiently for the next wandering soul to stray too far behind. Story 7: The Night Train, India. The train lurched forward with a low groan, its wheels grinding against the tracks as it pulled away from Delhi under the cover of night. Inside, the sleeper car dim bulbs flickered above narrow bunks, casting long shadows across the worn metal walls. The air smelled faintly of iron and old wood polish, mingled with the sharp tang of coal drifting in from the engine. Ethan pressed his bag beneath the lower berth and settled in, grateful for the privacy of the half-empty compartment. Outside, the countryside stretched dark and unbroken, the occasional glow of a distant village slipping past like a fleeting ember. He leaned back against the thin mattress, lulled by the steady rhythm of the train. Hours passed. The train rattled deeper into the countryside, where the silence between stations grew longer and heavier. Ethan drifted between waking and sleep, his mind fogged by the monotony of wheels on steel. It was then he sensed it, the faint impression of weight on the opposite berth. His eyes fluttered open. The compartment door was shut, the latch still fastened. Yet in the dim light, a shadow stretched where there should have been none. A figure sat hunched on the bunk across from him, still and silent. Ethan blinked hard, convincing himself it was his eyes adjusting to the light. When he looked again, the berth was empty. He exhaled slowly, telling himself fatigue played tricks. Curling onto his side, he pulled the thin blanket over him. The train swayed, and the steady sound of rails returned, lulling him again. But sleep would not hold. A soft noise stirred him, barely audible but distinct. A dragging sound as if fingers traced the floor beneath the bunks. It slid from one end of the compartment to the other, slow, deliberate. Ethan froze, his pulse quickening. He strained to listen, but the sound stopped the moment he shifted. Minutes crept by. Just as he began to relax, the weight returned. This time, unmistakable, the opposite berth sagged slightly, the mattress creaking under pressure. He sat up quickly, heart pounding, but the berth lay empty once more. The air seemed colder now, and the light above flickered as though a shadow had passed beneath it. Ethan's throat tightened. He tried to tell himself it was nothing a trick of the train. His mind frayed from lack of sleep. Yet, as he reached for his water bottle, he noticed something on the floor near the bunk. Thin scratches, etched into the metal marks like nails, dragged across the surface. Fresh enough that the edges gleamed, the marks caught the light each time the train rocked, sharp lines carved deep into the steel. Ethan's breath slowed, shallow and careful, as though drawing attention to himself might invite whatever had left them back again. He leaned closer, his hand trembling as he touched the grooves. They were real cool beneath his fingertips. The train rattled through a stretch of barren fields. No station in sight, no lights. Beyond the windows, only endless darkness pressing against the glass. The compartment felt smaller now, the air heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to his tongue. He sat back, eyes fixed on the opposite berth, waiting for the weight to return. It did. Slowly the mattress sank, as though someone invisible had lowered themselves onto it. The springs groaned long and low, vibrating through the silence. Ethan's chest tightened, his hands gripping the edge of his own bunk. He wanted to call out, but fear sealed his throat. Then, from beneath the blanket across from him, something shifted. The fabric rose, folding against a shape that wasn't there moments ago. A hollow impression, shoulders the faint outline of a head formed against the fabric. It bent slightly, as though the unseen figure was watching him. Ethan's skin prickled. He whispered into the silence, his voice breaking. "Who's there?" The train answered with a long, hollow whistle, its wail trailing into the night. When it faded, a different sound replaced it, a scraping beneath the floorboards, faint but steady, as if nails dragged along metal in time with the train's wheels. It traveled beneath his bunk, circling, always circling. The lantern overhead flickered harder, dimming to a weak glow. In that tremor of light, Ethan's gaze fell to the corner of the compartment where the floor met the wall. A small pool of darkness bled outward. Not a shadow, but something thicker, a stain that hadn't been there before. It spread slowly, inch by inch, as if seeping from within the steel itself. Ethan lurched forward, reaching for the door latch. His fingers fumbled slick with sweat, but the metal refused to budge. Locked, he pulled harder. The sound sharp in the silence, but the latch held fast. Behind him, the opposite berth gave a sudden groan, deeper this time, as though the full weight of a body had settled into it. The smell of iron thickened, unmistakable now, blood old and heavy, coating the air. Ethan pressed his forehead to the door. His pulse hammering, he could not look back. Not at the berth. Not at the shadow spreading wider. When the train finally slowed at the next station, a sudden knock rattled against the outside of his compartment door. 3 sharp raps, deliberate, human. His heart leapt with desperate hope. He yanked the latch again. This time, it gave the door swinging outward into the dimly lit platform. But when he stepped into the corridor gasping in relief, he realized the sound of the knock hadn't come from outside at all. Behind him, from inside the compartment, the mattress springs creaked once more, followed by the unmistakable sound of fingernails scratching slowly across steel.